The global economic landscape is shifting once again, and this time, the United States has made a move that could send shockwaves through international markets. The Trump administration has implemented a series of aggressive trade restrictions, effectively blocking a significant portion of imports from China. This decision, framed as a national security measure and a necessary step to level the playing field, is already sending ripples across various industries, impacting businesses, consumers, and the fragile global supply chain. Could this be the beginning of an economic downturn on a global scale? Or is the US simply reinforcing its economic independence? Let's dive into what led to this moment, what's happening right now, and what comes next. To understand the gravity of this decision, we have to go back to the origins of the US-China trade war. Tensions have been simmering for years, with both countries engaged in an ongoing battle for economic dominance. The Trump administration first escalated this confrontation in 2018, imposing tariffs on Chinese goods worth hundreds of billions of dollars. China retaliated, and the world watched as two of the largest economies locked horns. After a temporary truce during Biden's presidency, Trump has returned to office with a renewed commitment to economic protectionism, reigniting the trade conflict with an even more aggressive stance. The latest round of restrictions primarily targets technology, raw materials, and key manufacturing sectors. The White House has justified this move by citing concerns over intellectual property theft, supply chain vulnerabilities, and even allegations that China has been using its trade relationships to gain a strategic advantage over the West. The ban specifically affects semiconductor components, electric vehicle batteries, and certain categories of consumer electronics, which are now subject to steep import duties or outright restrictions. In a surprising and dramatic turn, the US Postal Service recently announced that it would temporarily suspend all incoming packages from China. This move, though later reversed, sent shockwaves through the e-commerce sector, particularly hitting companies like Shein and Temu, which rely heavily on direct-to-consumer imports from Chinese suppliers. The suspension was a response to the Trump administration's elimination of the de minimis rule, which had allowed shipments valued under $800 to enter the country tariff-free. Overnight, businesses and individual consumers saw their access to affordable Chinese goods vanish, sparking outrage and uncertainty. Major retailers and logistics companies scrambled to adjust their strategies. Amazon, Walmart, and other e-commerce giants issued urgent warnings to their suppliers, bracing for higher costs and potential delays. Some Chinese companies began looking for alternative shipping methods, while others rushed to establish new distribution centers in Mexico to circumvent the restrictions. The effects of this policy shift are already being felt, with reports of rising prices on consumer electronics, clothing, and household goods. But this isn't just about e-commerce. The broader implications of these trade restrictions are even more severe. The semiconductor industry, already strained due to global chip shortages, faces yet another disruption. The United States has been pushing to reduce its reliance on Chinese semiconductor manufacturers, investing billions into domestic production through initiatives like the CHIPS Act. However, industry experts warn that these efforts will take years to yield tangible results. In the meantime, American tech giants such as Apple, Tesla, and Nvidia are bracing for a turbulent transition period, with potential production delays and increased costs looming over them. Meanwhile, China is not standing idly by. In retaliation, Beijing has announced its own set of countermeasures, imposing additional tariffs on US exports, including agricultural products, energy resources, and high-end manufacturing goods. Furthermore, Chinese regulators have launched new investigations into American tech companies operating within their borders, signaling that this trade war is far from over. The global markets have already reacted to these developments. Wall Street saw sharp declines in key indexes following the announcement, with investors fearing prolonged economic uncertainty. The tech sector was particularly hard hit, as companies relying on Chinese components saw their stock values plummet. Overseas, European and Asian markets also experienced volatility as businesses reevaluated their supply chain dependencies and braced for further disruptions. The manufacturing industry, a cornerstone of global trade, is also taking a direct hit. With restrictions on raw materials like lithium and rare earth metals, the electric vehicle sector is facing an uphill battle. China dominates the production of these critical resources, and the new trade barriers are making it increasingly difficult for American automakers to secure the supplies they need. Tesla, General Motors, and Ford have all voiced concerns about the long-term viability of their electric vehicle ambitions if alternative sources are not quickly established. Adding to the complexity, shipping costs are rising at an alarming rate. Freight companies are reporting higher demand for non-Chinese suppliers, creating congestion in ports and driving up prices. The cost of moving goods from Asia to North America has increased significantly, leading to speculation that consumers will ultimately bear the brunt of this economic policies through higher prices and reduced product availability. At the diplomatic level, this move has put additional strain on an already fragile relationship between the United States and China. High-level talks between US and Chinese officials have yielded little progress, with both sides digging in their heels. The Trump administration insists that these restrictions are necessary to protect American interests, while China argues that they are an unjustified act of economic aggression. Meanwhile, other global players are taking note. The European Union, which has its own complicated trade relationship with China, is closely monitoring the situation. Some European nations are considering implementing similar restrictions, while others are weighing the potential benefits of strengthening economic ties with China as a counterbalance to US policies. Countries like India and Vietnam, which have been positioning themselves as alternative manufacturing hubs, stand to benefit from this geopolitical shift, potentially absorbing some of the market share previously dominated by China. For American consumers, the immediate impact of these restrictions is becoming evident. Electronics, home appliances, and everyday goods are seeing price hikes. Small businesses that relied on inexpensive Chinese imports are struggling to maintain profit margins. The holiday shopping season, which often relies on an influx of affordable products from overseas, is expected to be particularly challenging this year. The big question now is whether this strategy will pay off in the long run. Proponents argue that these restrictions will ultimately bolster American manufacturing, creating domestic jobs and reducing dependency on foreign imports. Critics, however, warn that the short-term economic pain could outweigh the benefits, potentially pushing the country into a recession if businesses and consumers are unable to absorb the added costs. As the situation continues to unfold, all eyes are on Washington and Beijing. Will there be a diplomatic resolution, or are we witnessing the beginning of a prolonged economic standoff? The world is watching, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Meanwhile, the economic ripple effects are only beginning to surface. Wall Street analysts are closely monitoring corporate earnings reports, while economists warn that the ongoing trade war could have long-term consequences for global GDP. International trade organizations are also weighing in, urging both sides to seek diplomatic solutions before irreversible damage is done. With mounting uncertainty, businesses and investors must navigate an unpredictable landscape, bracing for what could be the most significant economic showdown of the decade. Battle lines have been drawn, and the world is now waiting to see who will emerge victorious in this high-stakes game of economic chess.